It is the night of April 14th, 1865, Good Friday. And for the first time in 4 long years, America can finally breathe. The Civil War is over. The South surrendered just 5 days ago. And the man who held the whole country together, President Abraham Lincoln, is sitting in a theater box laughing at a comedy. He has about 2 hours left to live. Behind him, a door clicks open. A famous, handsome young actor slips quietly into the box, raises a tiny brass pistol to the back of the president's head, and fires a single shot. Then he leaps down onto the stage, shouts a phrase in Latin, and vanishes into the night. What follows is the largest manhunt the United States has ever seen. 12 days, thousands of soldiers, and one killer with a broken leg, who genuinely believed he was about to become a hero. His name was John Wilkes Booth, and he was not some shadowy nobody. He was one of the most famous actors in all of America. Handsome, rich, adored by women, recognized on the street wherever he went. He was also a fanatical supporter of the South, and he hated Abraham Lincoln with a burning personal rage. To Booth, Lincoln was not a president. He was a tyrant who had destroyed everything Booth loved. And here is what most people don't realize. This was not one lone gunman. It was a conspiracy designed to behead the entire United States government in a single night. Booth did not just want Lincoln dead. He sent one man to murder the Secretary of State and another to murder the Vice President. 3 killings at the very same hour to throw the whole nation into chaos. That night, Booth knew the play by heart. He had performed on that very stage. So he waited for the single funniest line in the show, the exact moment he knew the entire audience and the one guard at the door would be roaring with laughter. And in that precise second of noise, he stepped into the box, pointed the pistol, and pulled the trigger. There was a struggle. An army officer sitting with the Lincolns lunged at him, and Booth slashed his arm open with a hunting knife. Then Booth vaulted over the railing of the box, a 12-foot drop to the stage below, but his spur caught on a flag, and he landed wrong, snapping a bone in his leg. Somehow he still rose, turned to face the screaming crowd, and shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants. Then he limped out the back door, climbed onto a waiting horse, and disappeared. Across the city, at that exact moment, the second attack was happening. A huge, powerful young man named Lewis Powell talked his way into the home of Secretary of State William Seward, who was already bedridden after a carriage accident. Powell forced his way upstairs and stabbed him over and over in the face and the neck. Seward somehow survived. And the third assassin, the one assigned to kill the vice president? He lost his nerve completely, sat down in a hotel bar, and got drunk instead. That one failure of nerve would change the course of history. Lincoln never woke up. They carried his tall, limp body across the street to a boarding house and laid him diagonally across a bed that was too short for him. And through the night, the most powerful men in the country stood around him and wept. At 7:22 the next morning, Abraham Lincoln was gone, and the hunt for his killer began. Booth, out in the dark, still thought he was a hero. He genuinely believed the South would celebrate him, that history would remember him as a patriot. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. With a broken leg and one nervous companion, a young man named David Harold, he rode south into the Maryland night, heading for the Confederacy he was sure would protect him. His leg was getting worse by the hour. So in the dead of night, the two men stopped at the home of a country doctor named Samuel Mudd, who set the broken bone and sent them on their way. For days after that, Booth and Harold hid in the cold pine thickets of southern Maryland, fed in secret by Confederate sympathizers, waiting for any chance to slip across the Potomac River into Virginia. But the whole country had gone mad with grief and fury. The rewards on the assassins climbed toward $100,000, an almost unimaginable fortune. Soldiers flooded every road and farm, and when Booth finally got his hands on the newspapers, they did not call him a hero. They called him a monster, a common cutthroat, the most hated name in America. It crushed him. In his little pocket diary, he wrote, almost in disbelief, that he was being hunted like a dog for doing what he was certain the whole world would bless him for. After nearly a week trapped in the swamps, Booth and Harold at last made it across the river into Virginia, certain that now, finally, they were among friends. They came to a quiet tobacco farm owned by a family named Garrett, who let the two tired strangers sleep in their barn. The Garretts had no idea who they were sheltering, but this time the soldiers were right behind them. Just before dawn on April 26th, 12 days after the shot was fired, a troop of federal cavalry surrounded the Garrett barn. They had finally run him down. They shouted for the men inside to come out and surrender. Harold, terrified, stumbled out with his hands raised, but Booth refused. From inside the dark barn, the actor called out that he would never be taken alive and dared the soldiers to fight him. So they set the barn on fire. Through the cracks between the boards, they could see Booth in the flickering orange light, leaning on a crutch, holding a rifle, trying to decide whether to charge out or burn alive. And then a single shot cracked through the night. A soldier named Boston Corbett had aimed through a gap in the wall, against direct orders, and put a bullet through Booth's neck. Almost the exact spot where Booth had shot the president. They dragged him out of the burning barn, paralyzed from the neck down and dying. He lingered for 2 or 3 hours on the Garrett's porch as the sun came up over Virginia, and right at the end he asked the soldiers to lift his hands up so that he could see them. Staring at his own paralyzed, useless fingers, he whispered his final words. Useless, useless. The man who had dreamed of being a hero died believing his whole life had come to nothing, but the killing was not over. The government tracked down everyone tangled up in the plot and dragged them before a military tribunal. The assassin who got drunk instead of killing the vice president, the giant who had stabbed Seward, young David Harold, who had run with Booth to the end. One after another, they were sentenced to hang, and so was a woman, Mary Surratt, who owned the boarding house where the plotters had gathered and schemed. To this day, people argue about how much she truly knew. In the end, it did not matter. On July 7, 1865, she became the first woman ever executed by the United States federal government, dropped through the gallows alongside the men. And Dr. Mudd, who had simply set a broken leg, was sentenced to life in prison. And here is the cruelest twist in the entire story. Booth murdered Abraham Lincoln to save the South. He did the exact opposite. Lincoln had wanted to welcome the beaten South back gently, with, in his own famous words, malice toward none. Of all the men in Washington, Lincoln was the South's single best hope for mercy. And when Lincoln died, that mercy died with him. The grief and the rage over his murder helped unleash a far harsher, far more bitter punishment on the South than Lincoln would ever have allowed. Booth did not avenge the Confederacy. He destroyed its best chance at a gentle peace, and he turned the president he hated into a martyr and an immortal legend. There are still questions that hang over this case. Was Booth really acting with nothing but a handful of amateurs, or was there a bigger, darker hand guiding him? Some have always suspected that the Confederate government itself had a part in the plot. It has never been proven. But strip all the conspiracy theories away, and what is left is somehow even stranger. One vain, gifted, furious young man, totally convinced he was the hero of the story, who in a single night killed a president, doomed his own cause, and turned his own name into another word for traitor. He thought he would be remembered like the heroes he played on stage. Instead, he got 12 days as the most hunted man alive, a bullet in a burning barn, and one last word for his own hands. Useless. So here is the thing I keep coming back to. Booth was certain, completely and totally certain, that history would call him a hero. He was the villain the entire time, and he never once saw it. Which makes you wonder, how many people, right now, today, are every bit as sure that they are the hero of the story? Tell me honestly what you think down in the comments.